All right, build stuff. This is the weird part where I get to introduce me. So, hello everyone, it's me. Thank you. Yes, and as soon as the projector kicks in, we're going to talk about email. Because, you know, email is this wonderful thing. I'm not expecting any hands for this question. Does anyone here not have an email address? Yeah, I didn't think so. Email is ubiquitous, right? Email has become this thing. It is our source of identity. It's how you get locked out of an account or you forget your password. That's all right, we'll send you an email. Because if you have access to the mailbox, then obviously you're the right person. And, you know, we use all kinds of things. When I sign in to run Photoshop now, it'll go, oh, hang on, we just need to prove that I don't know what they're trying to prove here. Just need to prove that, you know, evil terrorists haven't broken into your house and they're using it to make memes. We're going to send you an email. Just click the code on that. And so we run on this assumption that email is this guaranteed, immediate, consistent delivery service. And you get locked out, we'll send you an email. You book some flight tickets, we'll send you an email confirmation. We'll send you an email code. We'll send you an email verification. And I thought it would be fun today to kick off with just a little bit of an interactive live demo. So I'd like you all to get your phones out, and I'd like you to scan it. Now, I am going to ask you in a second to put your email address into a little application. It's not going to get stored. It's not going to go anywhere. It doesn't even go on disk. There's no database. It's going to go in memory until the end of the talk, and then I'm going to shut down the VM. Now, there is very important. You're about to get an instruction. You're about to get a screen with a button on it that says, do not push this button yet. Do you know what to do when you get to that button? Yeah. If you wrote, do not press will end universe on a button, the paint wouldn't even have time to dry. So yeah, please go there, scan it, follow the instructions, and do not push the button yet. And while you do that, I'm going to switch over here. All right, so that's our life status. Every one of those little ats, that's one of you. Everyone that is yellow, that's someone who didn't follow the instructions. Now there are some instructions on that. So yeah, you got it. You got it. That's good. Yeah, all right. So once you put your email in, stand up. And then what we're going to do, we'll just give it, let the last couple get into the queue there. All right, so I'm going to count down from 3, and when I get to 0, we're all going to push the button, all right? 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, so when they're blue, they're in the queue. When they're yellow, they've been sent. If they're green, once you click the button, go and check your inbox. If you find it in your inbox, your little tick's going to go green. If you find it in your junk mail folder, it'll go pink. And once you've found it, you can sit down. And there's a couple of folks going, I haven't got an email. How long am I going to have to stand up for? Well, the good news is that this application has got an algorithmic retry, because, you know, cloud software is not 100% available. Anyone who's just in Kevlin's talk will have found out about this. So I've implemented a retry in accordance with the specifications here. Now, the good news, it's entirely spec compliant, so if I couldn't send the email, I'm going to retry after at least 30 minutes. So you can sit down now, anyone's still standing. Email says if it didn't succeed the first time, you wait 30 minutes before you try again. And email says you keep trying for 4 or 5 days before you decide that the message is undeliverable. Now, how does this align with the idea that if you get locked out of your account, we're going to send you a password reset? If you're trying to log into your account, we're going to send you a single-use authentication code. Click the link, magic Slack login link, all these kinds of things. There is just this kind of massive discrepancy between the standards that email is built on and the things that we then go and we use to build with it. And so what we're going to do today, I want to take all of you on a journey through the history of email and how we ended up with this kind of weird thing that is too useful to give up on, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and when it doesn't work, we're never quite sure about it. And we're going to start here. We're going to start in 1969, because if the United States of America was a television show, And yeah, that would be kind of a weird show, right? But 1969 would have been a season finale. It would have been a really, really good episode. Because that was the year that people walked on the moon. And that was the year that the Boeing 747 first flew. And it was the year that the Lockheed, the supersonic Mach 3 spy plane. And it was the year of Woodstock and this, pivotal moment in creative arts. And it was also the year that the internet was invented. And they invented it, and then they drew a picture of it. This is a map of the internet drawn by hand. It wasn't called the internet yet. It was called the ARPANET, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. Now, the interesting thing about email is older than networks, because the very first computers were so expensive that they had to be multi-user. You didn't buy a computer for you or your family. You bought a computer for everybody in your company or everybody in your laboratory. And so they would all come into work and they would log in on a terminal, and you could leave each other messages, like leaving little sticky notes on the fridge, except the fridge costs $250,000, but it's the same idea. And so you could leave messages, but the messages didn't go anywhere, because there was no network to send them across. And so when the ARPANET came along in the late 1960s and people started networking different computers at different sites, folks started thinking, hey, well, wouldn't it be good if I could leave a message for somebody at another university? If I could send a message to somebody in my company's other office on the West Coast. Now, email was not invented by one person. Email, as we know it today, is the product of, probably hundreds of very, very smart people making decisions over decades. But one of the most lasting and influential decisions was down to this guy. It's Ray Tomlinson. And Ray Tomlinson was working for a company called Bolt, Baranek, and Newman. And he was working on one of the first email systems. And email is, one of the interesting things about email is like having write access to someone else's computer. Because that's kind of how it worked. You'd have a mailbox file on another computer, you'd connect to it over the network, and you'd write something to the end of the mailbox. And he was trying to come up with a way of describing where the message is going to go, and he's looking at the ASCII characters on his keyboard, and he's like, well, this one isn't used for very much. And so Ray is the reason why we have the @ sign in email addresses between the username part that identifies who the message is for, and then the server part which identifies where it is that you need to send it, where's it gonna go. Now, back in the early days, the first email addresses, the bit on the right-hand side was just a host name, because DNS didn't exist. There was no .com, .eu, .any of these kind of, it was just MIT Multics. That was a computer. And if in the 1960s and the 1970s, you got a computer and you wanted to put it on the internet and you needed a host name for it, you'd pick up the phone and you'd call Jake. Elizabeth Feinler was the director of the Network Information Systems Center at Stanford University. And Elizabeth and her team, they maintained the directory, a printed directory of everything on the internet. All of the computers, all of the people, all of their phone numbers, never mind GDPR. This is just out there and people handing around photocopies and stuff. The network was a lot smaller back in those days. And there was a machine-readable version, which was called the hosts file. And there was this thing, the ARPANET Resource Handbook. And you could go through this and you could see the email addresses of literally every single person on the internet, all in one place. And that gave Gary Thuerk an idea. Now, one of the really interesting things about kind of researching computer history is computer history hasn't taken very long. We're only a couple of decades into the information age. I went looking for Gary Thuerk thinking I'd find Wikipedia pages. No, he's just on LinkedIn. This guy's still kicking around, and he says he's the father of e-marketing. Gary Thuerk invented spam. Because Gary Thuerk was a sales engineer working for the Digital Equipment Corporation. And they had just created this thing, the DEC System 20, which was one of the first computers that had ARPANET protocols built in. And he was like, we want to sell computers. I want to get my bonus. I want to sell a bunch of machines. And Digital, they had a lot of offices and sales presence on the United States East Coast. But the West Coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles, up to Seattle, kind of not so much. So what he did is he went through the ARPANET system handbook and he copied out the email addresses of every single person on the West Coast of America and sent them an email. This is the first junk ever sent, the first spam. This is the point where the headers overflowed. And so the rest of this was the top of the body of the email. And so about 250 people got an email that started with 250 other people's email addresses, and then this invitation to come and see the DEC System 2020 at the Hyatt House near the Los Angeles airport and everything. Now, Have any of you folks out there ever done something at work that kind of seemed like a good idea, and then you sort of realized later maybe you shouldn't have done that? Like, you ever got in trouble with your boss? You ever got in trouble with the police? You ever got in trouble with the United States Air Force? Because Major Raymond Chahor was really not happy that ARPANET, which was a defense-funded research network, was being used to sell computers, and there was a lot of very, very angry rhetoric backwards and forwards. The Air Force rang Gary Thuerk's boss and said, "You will not use our research network to sell your computers, do you understand?" Now, I like that idea. Like, I want to live in a world where if you send spam, the United States Air Force gets involved. Maybe there was another timeline here. Unfortunately, two things happened. One is the internet was full of nice people, lovely people who went, "Oh, we're really sorry, Air Force, we won't do it again. We'll be respectful netizens from now on." And the other thing is that it sold quite a lot of computers, because a lot of people turned up to see the DEC System 20. And so email marketing was born. We had email, and there's this thing that population scientists and sociologists do, where they try and classify people into these little generations, you know. So there's the baby boomers, and then the baby boomers turned into Generation X, and then there were the millennials, and then there's Generation Z or Generation Z, and then there's Generation Alpha. And there's this little gap in the middle. Little gap of the people who, we've never been quite sure what to call these people, because this is a micro-generation. And these people, to me, so for me, Generation X, if you're Generation X, it means you were born before Star Wars. Like, Star Wars came out when you were already alive. And if you were born after Return of the Jedi, you're a millennial. And the people in the middle, we are the millennial falcons. Represent. And we had this weird upbringing, because we had analog childhood and then digital adulthood. Like, the entire world got email at the same time I got email, which was when I was about 17 years old, which I think was just the right age for that to happen. Like, I really worried about kids who are like on social media now when they're 12. I'd have been a mess if I was on social media when I'm 12. But also, you know, I went to university, I spent my working life in a world where software existed. But the biggest millennial falcon of them all is the internet. Because when Star Wars came out in 1977, it was called ARPANET. It used NCP, was the protocol that computers used to connect. They used the hosts file to look up where other computers were, and junk email didn't exist. No one had ever done it. By the time Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, it was called the Internet with a capital I, and NCP had been deprecated in favor of TCP IP networks. DNS was a running standard that was being used to resolve host names, and junk email definitely existed. Now, the wonderful thing and the fascinating thing about email is modern email is one of a whole set of standards created during that 6-year window between the ends of the original Star Wars trilogy. And the specification for it was written by this guy, John Postel. And about 1982, he outlined the spec, and one of the things that SMTP did really well, said, look, this needs to be backwards compatible. We don't ever want a system where people using email version 2 can't send messages to people using email version 1, because otherwise it's going to break. So they put all this very clever forward thinking into it, to the extent that you can send email today using a protocol exactly as it existed in 1982, and it will still work. In terms of backwards compatibility, imagine you went out and you bought a brand new M4 MacBook Pro, and it came with a tape deck. That is the level of backwards compatibility that we're talking about when we talk about SMTP email and that kind of stuff. And one of the many, many things defined in that specification, RFC 821, was the format of an internet email address. Now, you folks have written code to validate email addresses, right? Everyone's done it. It's all right, you can admit it. This is a safe space here. Did you use a regular expression? I did, at least once, maybe more than one time. And, you know, I mean, validating email, maybe a regex isn't the best way of doing it, but it's like if you look at an email address, you can tell, right? Like, you know what's valid and what's not. So, like, let's use the Avengers as a case study here. So this is Tony Stark is iron.man@avengers.com. Who think that one looks all right? I think, yeah, that looks pretty good. What about Spider-Man at Avengers? Yeah, we're happy with that one. What about T'Challa with a little apostrophe in it? Yeah, you happy with that one? What about Rocket plus Groot? Yep, I see hands, that's good. Bruce Hulk Banner at Avengers.com. Yeah, I don't see quite so many hands now. You're like, is that? Where's he going with this? And of course, Vision, being a sentient, super intelligent AI machine supercomputer, doesn't need host names. He's just Vision IPv6 2001. All of these are valid email addresses. These all comply with the specification for an internet email address. And so maybe valid is the wrong question. Maybe asking if an address is valid is not actually what we should be doing. Maybe we care about, does it work? And that's not necessarily the same thing. Now, an internet email address is basically 2 bits. There is the domain part. Where is this email going? And there is the local part. What is going to happen when it gets there? Now, email is like I said, it's a lovely protocol because you can actually write it by hand. You can open up a command terminal window, whatever, and I can do an NS lookup, and I can say, hey, I want to do a name services lookup, DNS lookup, and I want to say set type equals MX. I want to look for mail exchange records for funwith.email. And the internet will go, oh yeah, these are the computers that handle email for that domain. And then I can telnet into smtp.funwith.email on port 25, same as it's been for 40-odd years, and it'll say, hey, nice to see you. And I can say, hello, I'm dylanbeattie.net. And it'll send back 250, SMTP1, fun with email, and I say, hey, I have mail from Dylan at dylanbeattie.net, and it says, okay. And I say recipient to hello at funwithemail. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting. Because at that point, that remote machine is going to look at that email and it's going to decide what to do with it. And so rather than resort to specifications for validation, I thought, well, let's see what actually happens in the real world. So I went onto Google and I looked up who's the best email provider for doing stupid experiments. And then I thought, no, let's scrub that. Let's look up the best business email hosting. Let's find out, what are the recommendations if you want to run an email for your company. And I came up with a short list. I looked through a whole bunch of articles and reviews and all these kinds of things. And now, disclaimer here. I am about to talk about some professional services and companies that provide email as a service. If you just want to host email, they're all really good. They're all solid, they're all reliable, they are secure, they are really good services. I am not doing a sensible review. I don't want anyone going back to work next week and saying, we need to move email provider because I saw Dylan talk about this in his talk. It's like, if you reviewed cars, sensible magazines would be like, how good is the gas mileage and is it comfortable and the stereo, all that kind of thing. This is me going, I got all these cars and I filled the car with gravel, I set it on fire and I threw it in a river. And then I waited to see if the car would explode before it sank. That's the kind of rigorous testing process we're applying here. So I took Office 365, I took Google Workspace, I took Zoho Mail, I took Proton Mail, and I took Fastmail. Like I said, these are all rock-solid email providers. But then I took them apart. And what I did for everyone is I registered a subdomain of Fun with Email, and I set up all of the security and the MX records for all those different providers just so I could go and do daft stuff and see what was going to happen. And what I wanted to see is, can I create mailboxes with all of those valid email address names in it? So could I create T'Challa at a Google mailbox? Yep. Office? Yep. Zoho Mail, I went on there, I said, I want to create T'Challa, and it worked. But then the user interface started crashing because there's bits of JSON that didn't realize that the backend would let you have an email address with a single exclamation, a single apostrophe in it. So I gave them all right, not sure about this one on that. Proton Mail, T'Challa at Fun with Email. Yeah, no, only alphanurex. So that's saying, I don't care, that's valid. We've got our own set of rules for what you can have over here, so we didn't get that one. And Fastmail, please check this. All right, not so good. Let's try another one. Let's try Rocket plus Groot. Now, I couldn't create a mailbox for Rocket plus Groot. Now, this gets us into a sort of slightly interesting gray area because email addresses and mailboxes, they're not always a one-to-one correspondence. Because it turns out that plus is a part of a valid email address, but in most systems, it's not part of a valid mailbox because plus is a thing called sub-address extension. So if I'm signing up, like if I signed up for emails from Build Stuff, I could be like Dylan plus Build Stuff at somewhere. And then if that shows up in spam, I know that Build Stuff sold my email to somebody. So you can use sub-address extensions, you can create your own addresses. Now, this system kind of has slowly rolled out over a lot of years. Gmail's had it since 2008. Fastmail's had it for a couple of years, and it finally got added to Exchange Online in in January last year. So it took about 15 years to be widely supported, but Plus is now this kind of non-starter. All these platforms, yes, it's a valid email address, but no, it's not a mailbox. You can't have a person called Rocket Plus Groot, even though the email address is valid, because that's not a person. Now, Bruce Banner, in quotes, this is allowed, this is legit, this is valid. There's not a single platform that would let me create that mailbox. Tried it on all of them. They just all said no. What about a single apostrophe? I thought, well, we're playing around with all this kind of stuff. So I tried that. Google said yeah. That said yeah. Zoho Mail, invalid username. All right, fair enough. We're going to let them have that one. I tried it on Proton Mail. Yep, not allowed. Breaks their validation requirements. And when I tried it on Fastmail, please check this. All right, so Google and Office say that single quote @ is valid. The rest of them don't. So it's not like validity is this kind of universally consistent. What about hyphen on its own? Now, Gmail said email cannot be a single hyphen. Oh, well, what about 2 hyphens? Yeah, fine. All right. I don't know why. That's just how Google have got their system wired in. Office 365 said, yeah, that's fine. Zoho said no. Proton said no. Fastmail said this name is already taken, which it's not. Now, what about single underscore? So underscore @ Google said, yep, you can have that. Outlook said, yeah. Zoho Mail, single underscore says AS101. And I was like, that's interesting. And when I get an error like that, I'm like, right, let's have a look in the network inspector and see what actually went wrong. So I took it apart, pulled out the API keys, ran the request through again, and this is a JSON message saying success with the data of that with AS101. I don't know what AS101 means. Let's just assume that that didn't work. And finally, I went on Fastmail. Can I have underscore @ And it went, great choice. So there we go. That's email validity. But then I thought, well, hang on. If we're not maintaining like this one-to-one parity between mailboxes and email addresses, you can create a thing called a catch-all mailbox. You can just say, hey, any email to this domain, I want you to send it over here. So I set up catch-all email addresses on all of these because I wanted to see if I could send an email with a space in the address. That's what I was trying to do here. So I set up the email address, the boxes. I set up catch-all addresses on all of them. And then I tried to send that email, and I couldn't because Gmail won't let you send it. It says the address was not recognized. Please make sure it's properly formatted. And Proton wouldn't let me send it. Now, this kind of boils down to this whole, is an email address valid? And obviously, we build validation into our forms. But really, the only thing you can say with confidence is that if it contains at least one @sign, well, if it doesn't, then no. Email's got to contain at least one @sign. If it does, then it might be valid. That is email address validation in a nutshell. Now, one of the fun questions comes up. Can an email address be case sensitive? What do you think? Hands up if you think it can. Hands up if you think it can't, and that's just crazy talk. It can, if you're really, really evil. The domain part can't, because everything after the @sign, that is built on DNS. And internet DNS, by design, is case insensitive and tries very hard to reduce everything to 7-bit case insensitive ASCII, because it just makes the internet work better. But the bit before the @sign, when SMTP was rolled out in the 1980s, they were not like giving it to people who'd never had email. They were giving it to people who already had mailboxes. And most of them were working on Unix machines. And Unix has a case-sensitive file system where your mailbox and your home directory are dictated by the file system with a folder with the same name as your username. So you could have Alice with a capital A and Alice with a small a on your Unix machine. They're different folders, which means they're different users with different mailboxes with different email addresses. And SMTP had to be able to support that. And so the local part can be case sensitive if you set it up to be that way. If you do, all kinds of horrible things are going to happen, and that is entirely your fault, but don't say we didn't warn you. Now, let's go back to our SMTP transcript here. We got as far as here. We got as far as recipient to hello@funwithemail. Okay, and I'm going to say, hey, data. And it says, all right, end your data with a dot on its own line. Hello, dot. There we go, queued. And at this point, I thought, well, hang on a second. I just sent an email without having to like type it into a form or anything. I sent an email using Telnet. I wonder if I could use this same approach. So there's my email. That's the email with no headers, no from, no to, no anything, but it did get delivered. And I thought, I wonder if I can use that to send an email with a space in it. So I fired up Telnet, and I'm like, right, Proton mail, let's go, bang, telnet, hello, fun with email, yes, okay, recipient to, bang, protocol error. All right, scratch, Proton mail's not gonna work. Let's try another one. Zoho mail, there we go. Telnet mx.zoho.eu, hello, mail from, recipient to, relaying disallowed. I'm not relaying it, I'm sending it locally, but clearly this has tripped some kind of anti-spam mechanism on there, so okay, that one's not gonna work. We'll try another one. We'll try one to Google, and I telnet into Google's SMTP, and I'm like, hello, it's me, it's fun with email. I wanna send mail to fun with email, with quotes, @GG. Now at this point, Google says, well, it says it's not gonna work, but also it says that is not a valid RFC 5321 address. Yes, it is. Google is lying to us here. That is a valid address. Google just doesn't wanna deal with it. So it's passing the buck. It's going, no, you can't send that. And I'm like, but it's valid. But you ever tried arguing with Google? No, it doesn't go well. Microsoft, Outlook.com. Now, I telnet into this one. The fun thing with this, I couldn't find a single computer anywhere that I have access to that would let me inject mail into Outlook. I tried a dozen. I tried like hotel Wi-Fi. I tried my house. I tried Starbucks. I tried the on-train Wi-Fi on Deutsche Bahn, which might have caused all their network problems. I don't know. I'm sorry. But then someone saw a video of a bit of this talk that I did on the internet, and they said, hey, I've got a server that definitely should not have been blacklisted by Microsoft, so I gave it a try. And they went through, and they did the same thing, and it looked just for a second like that had worked. But then they sent me this screenshot. So it got accepted, but then it was, oh, we don't know where to send this. And I'm like, there's a catch-all address on there. That should have worked. So Microsoft didn't work. And then finally, I was like, all right, well, there's one thing left to try. Let's try FunMail. So let's telnet into fm.funwithemail, and there we go. We're in on that. Mail from recipient. Okay. Data. Typing very carefully now, because we don't want to upset anything. This was sent to an address with spaces in it, and it worked. And there it is. So Fastmail wins the award for being the only one that's actually specification compliant when it comes to accepting. You can't create a mailbox, but you can deliver email with spaces in it. Don't do this. Like I said, we're setting cars on fire and throwing them in the river here. This is not how you run email in the real world. But this gives you some idea of just how much complexity is hiding behind that little thing saying email address is invalid. Please check it. It's nothing like as straightforward as it looks. Now, let's imagine that we wanted to send a message to this guy. And this is, you'll know who this is, right? This is the president, you don't know the president of Malawi? All right, fair enough. Anyway, and he lives in the presidential palace, which is in Capitol Hill, outside Lilongwe, in Malawi. And so what we're going to do is we're going to write a letter. We're going to put it in an envelope. We're going to put on a little stamp there with a picture of the king. And we're going to go to Malawi. And we're going to go to the presidential palace, and we're going to knock on the door, and the president is out. That's a delivery failure. We got eventual. What do? Do we go back down? Do we wait? Do we leave it there and hope it gets there? This is not how we send messages using surface mail in real life. What we do is we're not going to go all the way to Malawi. We're going to go to the end of the street. And we're just going to put that into a post box, and we're going to let the infrastructure handle delivery. And in the real world, this works. And in the real world, this works and is relatively reliable and scalable because there is a cost associated with doing it. If you wanted to run a scam where you sent people letters advertising, I don't know, illicit narcotics or any of the other things that people sell on the internet, you'd go bankrupt because of the cost of printer ink. Because printer ink is really expensive, and you'd have to buy envelopes, and you have to buy stamps, and you'd have to keep printing that. And it's just not feasible. It's not scalable. The internet and email reduced the cost of communication to effectively zero, and what that meant is that lots of people went, well, I might as well send 100 million of these emails, and if just one person accidentally buys something, then I'm going to have made a profit on the deal. And so this spam email, unsolicited email marketing thing that Gary Thuerk invented in 1978, this has become a problem. And it's the reason it's called spam, by the way, is there's an old Monty Python sketch where there's a bunch of Vikings sitting in a cafe that only has spam on the menu, and they start singing a song. I've never quite understood this, and I looked it up, and someone was like, oh, it's because the singing gets louder and louder, and it drowns out the dialogue. And I'm like, I still don't understand what that has to do with email. But there you go. That's why spam is called spam. And the reason why spam exists and spam is such a problem is that email was invented by hippies. And hippies believe in peace and love, and everybody just be cool and good vibes, everybody. And this kind of worked for about 20 years because the internet was very, very difficult to connect to, and everyone knew who you were. And if you had access, it was almost certainly through your job or through your university. So if you misbehaved, your boss or your professor would come and say, don't do that again, that's not what this is for. But then what happened in the 1990s is that the internet went mainstream. It became a consumer commodity, and you could get the Windows 95 action pack and the video guide, and it delivered things that were too good to be true. You know, you've got to imagine, you've got somebody who they are using internet email for the first time in the 1990s, and they're not naive, and they're not stupid, and they have just got an email with an attachment, and it's a picture of their granddaughter, who was just born yesterday in Australia. And they're like, this is amazing. Like, I can see my family, they're halfway around the world, and, you know, last time this happened, they had to send me a photograph, and it took 6 weeks to get here, and now they can email it. It's too good to be true. It's magic. But it worked, and it's real, and they can see it. And then the next email underneath is Bill Gates saying that if you forward this email to 10 friends, everyone gets a free trip to Disneyland. Well, the first thing was too good to be true, and that worked. Maybe this is true as well. The internet and the web just fundamentally ripped away everybody's assumptions about what was possible and what wasn't, and what worked and what didn't. Now, the good news is that a couple of years later, the United States government stepped in with the Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography and Marketing Act 2003, CAN spam, and this completely stopped junk internet email forever, and that's why we don't have spam anymore. Not what happened. One, it's a really toothless piece of legislation. It is incredibly easy to just put a thing in the bottom going, hey, yeah, we sent you junk, but you know what? Click here to opt out, and then you just set up another company. Two, and this always comes as a surprise to people who make laws in the United States, there's a lot of people in the world who aren't in the United States, and so American law does not apply to them. This just didn't work. Now, the fight against spam, it's kind of happened on four fronts. One of them was legislation. One of them is laws. The European Union is kind of getting better at this, but honestly, that's never going to work. The second one is client-side filtering. Now, we all do this. I do it. I have Gmail to filter my incoming email. I'm sure all you have something similar. To me as a developer, I'm not interested in your client-side filtering because there is nothing I can do to optimize that experience. That's your thing. You control it. The third thing that we can potentially do is we can filter messages based on the envelope. Based on where the message came. We don't have to look at the message itself, but we know where it came from. And we know who sent it, and we know who it's addressed to, and we know where it's going. And we can look at that metadata and try to decide whether this message is legitimate. Is this trustworthy or not? And this kind of boils down to, you know, the problem with SMTP is it's used for two things. One is I can use it to send mail. Two is you can use it to receive mail. And these are not the same thing. If I want to send mail, I can send it via my internet service provider. They know who I am. They know where I live. They got my credit card number. That's all absolutely fine. But I don't have an existing relationship with you or you or you. So if I want to send you an email, trust is a necessary part of it. And so the approach to say, well, you know, peace and love was all very well. What about peace, love, and authentication? Maybe that's the key to making email work properly. And they looked at SMTP and they went, oh, crap, we forgot to put in any kind of username, password mechanism because it would have been prohibitively expensive to run in the 1980s. And so about 15, 20 years later, the protocol was extended. Now, they didn't want to create the complex mail transfer protocol or the advanced mail transfer protocol. Instead, they created extended simple mail transfer. It's still simple, it's just extended simple. And any of you know the movie Labyrinth? There's a scene at the beginning of the movie where Sarah's in the labyrinth and she meets a little worm and she says, did you say hello? And the worm says, no, I said hello, but that's close enough. This is how extended SMTP works. I believe it was inspired by this scene because to speak extended SMTP, we're going to telnet into our fun with email, and instead of saying hello, we are going to say hello. And it's going to say, oh, cool. You speak extended SMTP. All right, here's today's specials of the day. I can do authentication with plain or login or the CRAM MD5. I can do start TLS if you want to remove this to a secure channel. I can do enhanced status codes. Now, if the server replies with anything else, both participants have to fall back to original SMTP. That's where this backwards compatibility comes from. But because I understand this, my client can say, oh, cool, yeah, let's start TLS. Let's move to a secure channel. And then we start again. Hello, dylanbeattie.net. And I say, all right, authentication, plain, and I give it a username and password. This is base 64 encoded. So it's not encrypted, it's just encoded, but we're on a secure channel. So the traffic can't be intercepted. And I can authenticate myself with that SMTP server. And so this gives us a mechanism that if I'm talking to somebody I already trust, somebody who already knows me, we can authenticate. I can prove that it's me. And this works up to a point for keeping bad people off the internet. Basically, the way the internet kind of works now is if you want to send mail, you've got to persuade someone you're trustworthy. Maybe it's your internet provider, maybe it's your ISP, maybe it's your employer, maybe it's cloud hosting, or you pay for software as a service. You can't just go out and just send email by connecting to random computers. Well, you kind of can't. There is one exception. This is John Gilmore, and John is he's a really interesting guy. He is a libertarian cypherpunk, and he was employee number 8 at Sun Microsystems, and he founded the Electronic Freedom Foundation. And he has this lovely quote: "The net interprets censorship as damage and routes around it." You know, the internet protocols, they were designed to survive sites getting destroyed and network outages and weather damage and storms. And so if you have a server that says, well, I'm not sending email, the protocols are designed to find a way around that, because that's where the resilience comes from. And I kind of agree with 95% of what John Gilmore says, and the last 5%, I think he's just a massive asshat, because he runs a server called hop.toad.com, which is an open SMTP relay, and he will not lock it down, he will not shut it down, he will not secure it, and he is constantly telling his friends, oh, well, if you can't send me email, you've got to complain to your internet provider, because they should be accepting mail, and they're not, and that makes them bad people, and it's not anything bad I did. And it's like, he's ethically right, but he's practically wrong. And there is not, I really wanted to send some mail through hop.toad.com for this talk. I couldn't find a server anywhere that would let me relay through it. All of them were just like, don't be ridiculous. If you send email through that server, we're not going to accept it for anybody. And so the last line of defense here is the other end of the pipe. It's incoming mail. It's what happens when my system receives email from any one of you or anyone out there in the world, and I can look at that message and I go, do I trust this? Is this legit? Now, one service which gained a lot of popularity is I can go and look in a database, and I can say, hey, I just got this email, it came from that network address. Is that network address reliable? And a bunch of people set up real-time block lists, Barracuda, Worm RBL, Nick Spam, Sorb Spam. And the idea here is good. They're like, if we get reports that a particular address is sending junk mail, we'll add it to the list, and then the rest of the internet knows that that address is misbehaving, and they can take appropriate action. The problem is, it is trivially easy to get an email onto one of these lists. You just go, hey, he sent spam, and they go, yes, we believe you. Absolutely believe you. If you have been inadvertently reported, or someone is reporting you to cause mischief because they want to mess with your day, it's a pain in the ass getting yourself back off again. This is why I eventually stopped running my own email server. I ran my own email server for about 20 years, and it was a lot of fun, and it just got to a point where every time someone, I had one IP address and like a block of 20, and when someone else in that block sent junk, or someone just accused them of sending junk, I'd get shut down, and I'd have to go and fill out the form, and this would be processed within 48 hours, so you got no incoming email for 2 days, and then someone reports you again, and this just, it stopped being fun, it stopped being interesting. Now, we've come up with better systems, and the wonderful thing about the way these kind of systems work is they didn't want to change SMTP. Fundamentally, the protocol that runs email has to maintain this backward compatibility all the way down, and so they use DNS to kind of fit stuff in around it, which I think is really, really clever. So because DNS is so flexible, you can go on the internet and you can say, right, I control this domain. I want to add a bunch of records. So if I go on Fun with Email and we do a DNS lookup and we look at the text records, the TXT records, there is this record down here with a value of V equals SPF1, Sender Policy Framework. This is me in my DNS that I control for funwith.email, telling the rest of the world, hey, this IP address is allowed to send mail. And these people are allowed to send mail on behalf of that domain, and these people are allowed to send mail on behalf of that domain. And if it comes from anywhere else, then I got this little squiggle character in there, and that means a soft fail. It means deliver it, but put a stamp on it saying, hey, this thing looked suspicious. Please don't trust it. And the plus here is optional, so normally plus means deliver it. Question mark means you don't care. That's a soft fail. And I could put a hard fail. I could say this address is allowed to send email, and anything else, no, just cut it off. Don't deliver that. And the plus is implicit. So by creating these kinds of records, we can publish to the rest of the internet, hey, these are the people who can send email from my domain. And if email comes from anywhere else claiming to be from that domain, that's fraudulent. It's malicious. It's not real. Please don't deliver it. And so we get to the point, finally, where we have accepted the envelope for delivery, and now we want to open it up, and we want to look at the content. We want to see what's inside that. Now, if I'm sending a message, I get as far as data. At this point, I put in a block of headers. Now, these headers are not for the machines. These headers are for the humans. This is telling us where did it come from, who's it going to, what does the subject look like. There is my message body, and if everything that I ever want to talk about is in 7-bit American 1960s flavored ASCII, this is all you need. Unfortunately, that is all that email can do. Email is a 7-bit protocol. It doesn't even support 8-bit. And so if we want to send anything more interesting than that, anything more ambitious or more involved, if we want to send attachments, we want to send Unicode, we want to send email in Korean or Ukrainian or Polish or anything that doesn't fit into American flavored ASCII, we need to use the multi-purpose internet mail extension, MIME. And MIME's actually really cool, because MIME is a way of saying we'll take literally anything, turn it into ASCII, and then rehydrate it at the other end to get your original message back. And the way MIME works is we've got our message body here, there's the subject, there's the date. MIME version 1.0, they did originally kind of say MIME is going to have other versions, but then they realized they'd messed up the spec, and there would never be a 1.1 or a 2.0 because no one figured out how to make that work. And so 1.0 here, that's actually a floating point Boolean. If it's 1.0, it's true, and if it's anything else, it's false. And then content type, multi-part mixed, and then this thing here, this is a boundary string. And then I'm going to put my message in. And so MIME is hierarchical. It's containers inside containers. This says, hey, there is your multi-part alternative, but then that one I got, well, I'm going to put more containers inside this container. So I've got a text version, and I've got an HTML version, and then I'm going to close out that boundary string. And this is all still just 7-bit ASCII. And then I'm going to say, all right, and now I want to put in an attachment. It's an image, it's a PNG, and I'm going to base64 encode it. And then I can just put the image in as ASCII encoded text and build this whole kind of complicated hierarchical, multiple representations and formats and text and HTML. If I want to, I could put in different languages, like I'd have Lithuanian and English in the same email message. Now, when it comes to building software, like the demo app, which is on GitHub, or like any kind of software with this, the problem you have as a developer is there are so many different ways that the people out there in the world could be looking at your mail. So many devices, so many different formats. Now, when it comes to HTML email, writing HTML email by hand is horrible. It's like the worst thing you can do for money. There are 2 platforms out there. There's a thing called MJML, the Mailjet markup language, and there is Foundation for Email, which doesn't have a logo, but it does have a cuttlefish, so I thought I'd put that up on the slide here. And what these do is they give you an abstraction over HTML that's targeted for email. So you can say, I want to write this. Mailjet mail with a Mailjet head and a Mailjet preview and a column and an image. This is what we write. This is what developers have to write. This is for the humans. Then you run this through the compiler, and what it does is it turns it into email-flavored HTML, which is just horrible because it's full of tables inside tables with Microsoft Outlook comments and inline styles and all this kind of stuff, because this is the state of the art when it comes to rendering HTML email on client devices. So if you find yourself working with this stuff, 1, MJML or Foundation, they will take away so much of the pain. 2, figure out tools like Mailtrap. Mailtrap is a test server that you connect your software to, and you can say, right, I've sent an email. I want to look at the HTML for it. I want to look at the source code for it. I want to see what it looks like. I want to see the raw content. I want to see the spam analysis. Is my email going to get sent? Is there anything in here I should worry about? You see here, from domain was registered in the last 14 to 28 days. All of these things that the rest of the internet is going to decide whether to trust you or not get factored into the metadata that you can see using these kinds of tools. Is it going to render properly? You can get a breakdown of all the HTML you've used in your email and where it's likely to have rendering problems. But the thing is, you can go through all of the motions. You can test that on every single device out there, Gmail and iOS and Android and Outlook and Zoho, and you're like, it's done. I'm a good developer. I did my job well. And then you get a message from the client going, the email doesn't work. And you're like, what do you mean the email doesn't work? And they're like, I can't see the logo. And you're like, I tested that. Send me a screenshot. And they send you a screenshot, and you're like, oh, really? Dark mode email is a thing we have to think about now? Because yes, it is. Because email is entirely down to the consumer about how they choose to consume it. And if you are a developer working with marketing people who are trying to control every single detail of the customer experience, you're going to have a rough time with this. And you're going to end up having to make compromises, like trying to design a logo that'll work whether the background is black or white. If any of you have a friend who works in graphic design, ask them to design you a logo that'll work on a black background and on a white background. They'll look at you like, no, you can't do that. First thing we do is choose the color of the paper, and you're like, no, the client can change the color of the paper afterwards. And this is what makes email so maddening if you're working on it, trying to use it as a tool for marketing and promotion, is it's a moving target. And anyone can change the way they consume email at any time, and you are going to be playing catch-up. So don't do that. Embrace it. Email is the last system we have left where I can send you a message without a trillion-dollar multinational controlling the platform that we use to talk to each other. If we want to talk on WhatsApp, well, WhatsApp is owned by Meta. Mark Zuckerberg owns our conversation. If he decides he doesn't like one of us, we get kicked off. We can't have that conversation anymore. Same with Signal, same with Telegram, same with, text messaging. You got to have a carrier contract with a mobile phone network. But email, despite all of the challenges and the junk and the authentication and trying to control the formats and everything, it is still a completely free, open protocol that I can set up a machine and you can set up a machine, and we can use that to have a conversation, and no one can use our conversation to try and get rich. And I think that is really worth something. Thank you very much.